I would say this as a business person, you may have a superstar, but at a certain point, even if they're bringing results and they're disruptive to the rest of the team, it's not going to work.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we feature top leaders on how they measure success in their business and life. Now, let's learn from their experiences.
Carl J. Cox here, host of the Measure Success podcast, where we talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Today, I'm excited to have our guest, Greg Selkoe. He's a visionary entrepreneur known for founding Karmaloop, a major e-commerce platform in the streetwear market. In 2020, he co-founded XSET, an esports and lifestyle brand with industry veterans. He is also a Harvard MPP graduate and Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year. Greg's contributions have been recognized by Goldman Sachs 100 Most Intriguing Entrepreneurs and the Summit Series Top 35 Entrepreneurs Under 35, among other accolades. Greg, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks, Carl.
Absolutely. Well, it's always good to talk with somebody from my hometown, Boston. So go Sox and
go
Celtics. That's right. Go Celtics. They are at the time of this recording, they're hopefully on their way to winning a championship. And so from that perspective, let's get started in what you're doing today with XSET. Give us some more detail, understanding for those who might not be familiar with what you're doing.
Yeah. So really, gaming is a massive, industry. There's 3 billion people that game worldwide, all over the globe. 45% of them are women. They're all different backgrounds. Essentially what we do is we create content and lifestyle for gamers. And what that looks like is, very similar to brands like Barstool Sports or another Boston company, Bleacher Report, Overtime. The idea is that we serve a community of gamers who are not necessarily into esports per se, although esports is part of what we do. Mostly they look at gaming as sort of where they learn about trends. And it's kind of where they discover people. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this podcast know who Mr. Beast is. He's sort of the biggest star in the gaming creator space. He started out playing Minecraft. There's another guy named Ninja who was very big at one point. And these guys are personalities. They play the game, and by guys, I mean men and women. They play games, and they stream themselves playing games, and they make content. Sometimes, not sometimes, quite often, the content's just about their life or their interests. And it's really the intersection of music, fashion, art, entertainment with gaming.
Perfect. That is a great. I'm curious. It's interesting. You had your Karmaloop experience. What motivated you, right, to start something new, start something different? What was the key driver behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had interest in cultures, like modern cultures, like anything from like punk rock to hip hop to anime to, kind of pop culture generally. And I started off with Karmaloop, which was an e-commerce platform, which was selling streetwear clothing. But there was a whole culture around that as well. There was, musicians and DJs and other folks that kind of came along with these sort of more niche brands. They were big niche, but they were still niche. And so, when I created Karmaloop, we really told a brand story. We involved the creators. We were the first e-commerce site to have a YouTube channel, for instance. We shot the clothing on models that are evocative of the brand's image. Did a lot of stuff that was really the kind of what's much more common today of content community commerce. At the time, we were getting a lot of heat for, what are you? Are you an e-commerce site, or are you a content site or a community? What is this? And ultimately, that proved to be a very effective model. So gaming had a lot of similarities to sort of streetwear culture, and it's sort of in some ways there is a lot of streetwear culture in the gaming community. And so, I had initially started a company in West Hollywood in 2017, I think. It was a company called WanderSet. I had met a couple of these famous gamers, ostensibly the idea they were going to do some stuff with my company WanderSet. WanderSet was what we called narrative e-commerce. There were like different celebrities and influencers curating product. Essentially, we wanted to have some different people, these famous gamers, millions of fans, weren't musicians, weren't athletes, but they were big celebrities, right? And I met the guys. There was a company called FaZe Clan. Really liked them. Wound up really liked what was going on. Was totally like taken with it. Like, wow, this is so big, and no one and so many people don't know anything about this. So yeah, so I essentially wound up eventually merging my company with their company, and I came on as their co-head for a little bit, and that's really kind of what thrust me into the gaming stuff. And so after I did that for about 2.5 years, I had a very good, successful exit with that company. They went on to go public like 3 years later. Didn't work out great for them, but that wasn't really my problem. I had already exited. But I kind of learned a lot about the space and then kind of perfected it with the company I have now, which is XSET.
That's awesome. And I appreciate you going through that part. I'm just kind of curious, as you mentioned that piece of it going public, did you have this wish I didn't get out for a moment, then glad you did get out kind of experience?
Oh boy, yeah. It's funny you say that. It's yeah. So I exited a $400 million valuation. And granted, the company was worth zero when I got there 2.5 years before, probably less than zero. They had a lot of problems. They had debt. It was a turnaround, and they kept telling me, "You're crazy. We're going to be $1 billion company." I didn't believe it because I just didn't have a huge amount of faith in the management and the founders that I was working with. It just, to me, it was like, I have to get out. This is the right time. And so I sold all my equity. They kept saying, "Well, don't you want to keep some in?" I'm like, "No, I want all sold. I want it all gone." But they didn't know at the time I was also going to be starting a competitor, so it didn't make sense for me to have equity in a competitor, anyways. But they went public at $10 a share at a like $700 million valuation in a SPAC. The company went up to like $1.8 billion in valuation. So I felt pretty stupid. Like, damn it, why did Although I have to say, I remember talking to my wife and my dad. I said, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, is the world this crazy now that this thing is worth 1.8 billion? Because they don't know what they're doing. Sure enough, by the time so I was pretty, I would have made 10 times the money or 7 times the money or something like that. 5 times the money, actually. But still a lot of money that I would have left on the table. Long story short, by the time the lockup period was over, their valuation was 17 million, and everyone got wiped out, and I was the only one who made a lot of money from the company. So I looked like a genius, but for a while I looked like an idiot.
Wow. I thank you for sharing the details behind that. And that is one of the hardest things of what you just went through there for the entrepreneurs, whether you continue to roll your money in, right, into the next deal, whether that's in private equity, right, or whether that's potentially a public or getting acquired by a competitor. I thank you for sharing that story, because that's one of those great examples of it made sense, right? It was the right thing to do. And then sometimes you have the opposite, right, where people get out and they miss out. It's the joke around here for years. I grew up around where Intel had a lot of factories, and there was the joke of the $1 million boat. And the $1 million boat was somebody bought a boat for $35,000 of stock, that they sold some stock with, and now it's worth $1 million, right, today. And so there was like these, things that took place. Now we're seeing that with the NVIDIA today, right? Of where people, guy I know who ended up leaving Intel, ended up joining the small little game card company, and look at them today. At least the moment of the recording, the second largest company in terms of market cap. You just sometimes don't know. But just as an advice standpoint, when you're perhaps somebody's asking you of whether you should get out or stay in or keep some in, what advice do you have for those founders or people who have money in something when they should make that decision, or what they should consider when making that decision?
Well, I mean, it's nice that I made that decision, but my first company, while I had a great exit for the first exit, I only sold 40%, and I stayed in, and I went up zero. I took a zero on the second exit, and I probably could have exited for a lot of money 2 or 3 years earlier than if I hadn't stuck around. In fact, I know I could have. So net, I'm down in terms of decisions, because that was a bigger total number. But at least I didn't make the same mistake twice. And so I was very anxious to get out, frankly, because I had made a mistake prior and waited too long. So I think to me, the way you look at it is who are the people involved, right? I went through Y Combinator program out in Silicon Valley, which is an incubator. They oftentimes talked about like what's the how do you invest how do you know how to invest in a startup? And really, they say you have three reasons. It's team, team, and team. And they'd always say like, give me a terrible idea and a great team versus a great idea and a terrible team, right? And the terrible idea will still be successful somehow. It's really about and I didn't believe in the people that were running I had been working with these folks for 2.5 years, and there was no scenario where I was going to stay. Right, I was a co-equal because we did this merger, and I was co-equal with the head, so there was no tiebreaker. We were basically co-managers of the business. Both had a permanent board seat. Both had very strong employment agreements. So it was either mutually assured destruction because I had a different viewpoint on where they should go with the business, and I just didn't believe that their vision of where they wanted to go which was spend a lot of money and not focus on making money, ultimately was going to pay off. And I didn't think they were the guys that could do it, so I opted to get completely out. I think in business you kind of have to check your emotions. And I don't know what decision I would have made, but if I felt like, hey, look, I don't work in this company anymore, but these guys are pretty damn smart, probably would have kept some skin in the game. But I think it's really just so much of it has to do with intangible feelings of how much and you really have to ask yourself, are you telling yourself something that isn't true? What would objectively, if someone else was in this business and they asked you for advice and you looked at all the factors, what would you tell them? And that's generally the right answer. I mean, like the business I'm doing now, it's very, very tough, but I got a hell of a team. Like we got a long way to go still, but we're also, done things that no one else has been able to do yet. This is a brand new model of a company of a way of doing things. And it's just, I have such a good team that sticks with me. And so we're able to ride the wave. So I really think it has a lot to do with who are the people that are going to, carry the ball and yourself as well. Can I take this business to where it needs to be? And you have to be realistic about it. I mean, I'm very good at starting companies, and I'm pretty good at, I'm very good at especially when companies are challenged and you have to kind of rally the team. I'm great. I get a little bored when things are going really well, and I've learned my lesson, but I tend to start other businesses in the business, and trying to expand what the business can be. And that's not always a bad thing. But you got to understand, like if the company's going public, I probably, any company I was involved, I probably would put someone else in as CEO. And I just, the guy who's my COO now is the former CEO of Lacoste and Diesel, so large public companies. He was the CEO. So I've got someone there that could maybe help me steer the ship. But generally, you have to also look at the circumstances. What's going on with the market? Can this team get through it? And are we, or is the life cycle of the company going the wrong direction? And that, it's just maybe time, at that point where, no matter what you do, the company's not ever going to be what it was at its peak. So there's a lot of different factors.
Let's talk about another thing just related to this. Once again, I think these, I read recently that 90% of business owners' retirement is in their company, right? So these type of decisions are the most important decisions, of like when to sell. That's a question mark. But the other question mark is if you're going to stay in. I'll just leave that. Let's put that comment. If you're going to stay in, what type of things should they consider when bringing in new investors?
Well, I mean, again, that's a good example. And again, I don't want to be in the last question. I said there's a lot of factors. There are a lot of factors where people are the central one. In terms of bringing in new investors, I mean, that's what happened to me with my first company. I brought in the wrong private equity group. I made some mistakes myself, but they weren't a partner. They were an adversary, and I didn't realize that until, it was pretty much too late. And, I was a young guy. I wasn't experienced. I didn't really understand the difference between my venture partner that had put 80 million into the business and wanted me to really succeed to the private equity group that put 40 million in, but really wanted to own the business. Were waiting for me to make some mistakes, or made it actually put roadblocks in my way, because and ultimately they owned the bit. Ultimately they got it right. So, and I didn't have good lawyers sort of protecting me on the fine print, and the company was completely successful, and it turned into a sort of a bloodbath, because they don't care. They're willing to let the company go like this, because once they get the company, they try to get it and flip it, and they did. They probably broke even with us, but most of them, the company just goes under. But the three that they revive and bring up to back and higher, that makes up for the 10 they ruin, right? Their majority of those companies, this private equity group especially, gets into fail eventually but they get it. They get a hold of it, and the few that they can knock it out of the park, that covers all that plus. So you really have to look at who are the folks investing, what are their motivations, what's the difference between venture capital and private equity, and there's good private equity folks, venture debt. What are the covenants? Because we had venture debt, never missed a payment. It was no problem at all with that. But there were covenants that were really obscure, and I had a violation on one, and it was like as small a violation as not having a signature from a CFO who was in a motorcycle accident. But it said in the thing he had to be the guy to sign the thing at the end of the month, and that was considered a violation, because they didn't really distinguish between small technical defaults and big defaults. So a lot of stuff that you really need to read the fine print, and you got to really question what does this person want out of investing in this company? Do they want to be my partner? Do they want us to succeed? Do they want to own it? When do they want to get their money out? If I say I want to run this thing for 10 years, but in 3 years they want their money out, it's going to become uncomfortable.
Okay. You need to stop, and we need to go back to what you said there. Are you saying they forced an issue based on unable to sign, the CFO signing a document?
We had two technical defaults, and the first one was that the CFO had a motorcycle accident, so I signed the financials at the end as accurate, and I got a letter. This is when I started to know that we're finding you in technical default. I can't remember what the guy's name was, but was supposed to sign that. And I called up and I talked, and then I said, okay, wait a second. These guys are not my friends anymore. Like they really, there's something else at work here. And then the second default was something to do with like some cash. It was a weird formula that I didn't even realize that we had. And at that point, then they just put me on notice. They called a $40 million note and said, you have 30 days to pay us. And I got the money actually within, 36, 37 days. I put together a group and they said, well, 30 days are up. We don't have to take the money. We want the company. It was a tough experience.
Okay, for those who aren't watching on YouTube right now, I've been putting my hands through my hair and just unbelievable. So that what you are talking about is nightmare private equity scenario there. But I will say this, and Greg, you'll probably grin at this one, whether it's VC or private equity, when there's a press release and a CEO or founder proudly says, we just raised whatever it is, 20 million, 50 million, 100 million, and they're bragging on the press. It's amazing how many times they don't realize that they just brought in 20 million, 50 million, 100 million, even though it might be called stock, it's really debt, meaning they're expecting to get that money back.
Oh yeah.
And then some. And when you don't do well, when you're not exceeding expectations, they're going to find a way to get you out. And ideally they're working with you. By the way, I work with a lot of great private equity firms that do a great job. Just to clarify, they're not all like what Greg said here. That's nightmare scenario. A lot of them are absolutely will work with you and will work with you.
100%. It just depends on the firm. I happen to get, I didn't vet them because someone I trusted had introduced them to me. And then I said, where did you meet these guys? And this is the sad irony of the whole thing, because this was what our partner at the VC. He said, I met them at a dinner, like at a function or something. I just had his card, so I passed it on to you. Like I assumed they knew these guys, right? And that was really stupid, because all you had to do was Google and see that this was not the first time they had, they took over a grocery store chain, and there was lots of accusations of them being disingenuous. And sorry, my dog's barking. So yeah, I mean, again, I was in my early 30s or mid 30s, and I just didn't have the experience. So, it was a terrible experience, but man, have I learned a lot from it.
Yeah, no. And I, once again, I hope those are listening. This is honestly one of my most enjoyable ones, because often I appreciate your transparency, because often you don't get that, right? People aren't going to talk about the nitty gritty of, there was a signed waiver covenant and they enforced it, right? That just doesn't typically happen, not in my experiences. But at the end of the day, it can happen. And so interviewing and looking at past information, interviewing their past investments to get an actual picture, are those CEOs still around, or those founders still around, will tell you all you need to know, typically, in the majority of the time.
Yeah, I mean, all I had to do was Google. I never did it. I mean, it's sad, but like, part of the thing was I started this company, basically even before grad school. I was living with my parents. It was in my parents' basement. I had nothing but success. I mean, obviously the first 5-6 years was very hard to raise money. I was living at home. I didn't take a salary, but it was still, the company went like this the whole way. Right. And, I'm a 28-year-old kid, and someone's going to invest $80 million in something I'm doing. I'm just thinking it was a series of really, I could make a phone call, be like, look, I need $10 million, and it would go into my bank account. And I was, at our peak, we were doing 180 million a year. And I made a lot of people money, because fortunately we had a good first exit. It was all secondary, but I didn't have some of that's luck, some of that's timing. And I just kind of assumed everyone had goodwill, and I could figure it out. And in that case, I didn't have the right people around me, and I didn't do the right diligence.
Yeah, no. Well, once again, well said, well done. So let's go back to, once again, kind of current company where currently things are at. I'm curious, what are you doing differently here from a management structure, organization structure, culture in this one, based on things that you've learned in the past, to do this one even better than before?
Yeah, I think so I've exited 2 of the 4 founders. Not a fun thing. They don't like me anymore now. Well, I wouldn't say that's true. We're not friends anymore. Let's put it that way. And I probably should have made those decisions even earlier. But what I'm doing different is, like, I don't tolerate anyone who's not carrying their weight, right? Like, we have to have an all-star team of superstars who try and don't make mistakes as much as possible, and are bringing in results. And the problem with one of the founders came with me from my last company when I left, and I had hired him at the last company without really, he's a somewhat famous guy in entertainment, and so but never really had worked closely, because I was the boss over there, and I gave him, he had a job, but we weren't working on the and when I started the new company. And then another guy I had known socially for 20 years, and he certainly was an expert in the space, but I didn't really know him. So, I think that what I'm doing differently is I really am not tolerating having people that kind of take time away from the focus on the business anymore. And the other thing is, we did exit them successfully. I got their equity back. We left on, peaceful terms, not like, as I said, they don't probably love me right now, but we were fair to them. We worked it out. And I think, like, if something's not working in the sort of interpersonal part of the company today, it's going to work even less well in 2 months if the person's still there. There's damage that accrues, and it took us time to undo that damage, actually, once I got the folks out of the business. And so I would say that, like, I definitely carried a lot of dead weight in other companies, because I'm a nice guy. I really like people. I try to give people lots of chances if I can, and I still do that even in this company. But it's a degree of difference, what I would kind of put up with in the past. And I think the way I look at it is, like, look, we're trying to build something really amazing that everyone in the company is going to benefit from, because they all have equity, and we're still relatively small compared to where we're going to be. So anyone who's at the company now, who's here for a while, is going to make a lot of money once we get big and exit, assuming that happens. And so that's taking money out of all the effort everyone else is doing. That's taking money out of their pocket, and it's being disrespectful to their energy and their time and the focus that they've given. So I have a totally different viewpoint, because I used to feel bad for that person. They're going to miss out. But really, it's not fair to the rest of the team. So I've been very conscious of, addressing issues that I see and not kicking them down the road. I would say this as a business person: you may have a superstar, but at a certain point, even if they're bringing results and they're disruptive to the rest of the team, it's not going to work. And I was fortunate enough to do some work with Jimmy Iovine, who founded Beats by Dre and Interscope Records and Death Row, and then produced for the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. I mean, the guy's like been successful in 3 careers at the top of his game. And in his office in LA, he's got a big sign on the wall that says, "If the shit gets bigger than the cat, get a new cat."
That's great.
Yeah. So if that, meaning like if someone's great, but they're even bigger, they can't stay.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, and but so true, right? It is so true at the end of the day. I think that's the hardest thing is, right, when people are getting stuff done and they're good, so to speak, but if they're more of a challenge than they're worth having around, it's not worth it at all.
Yeah, the 2 founder guys, they're good, they're talented, but it just wasn't symbiotic in the office, in the company.
Yeah, and what you're talking about there is that, that classic alignment, right? If things are not aligned in a business, you move slower. And when you're in your business, especially, any type of startup type environment, you need to move fast, and that's about trust. And when everybody has full trust, you have alignment, you move fast. When things aren't, they just exactly it turns into that picture of the cat, basically. So, all right. So, Greg, and maybe I'll just make it more of a general question. How do you measuring success today?
Well, look, I'm a tough critic of myself, and I think all entrepreneurs are. That's what drives us. And I would say being a good parent and still being an entrepreneur. I wouldn't say that being an entrepreneur, you're going to be able to give the same amount of time that you would if you were working in a, you gotta, I mean, the reality is, and this, Carl, like, you got to give everything you got, and it still might not be enough. Right. And you gotta, not give up on anything. So I've kind of orchestrated a situation where I live in an apartment on the 19th floor in this building, and I rented an apartment on the 30th floor and made that the office. And so my commute is 11 stories in an elevator every morning, and my kids can come up and down anytime they want, and I can be down checking in, and I live in the city, so it's not that hard to take people to soccer practice and stuff. I'm not driving a ton, so I try to be present with my kids and still build a company. To me, having good interpersonal, like, family relations is successful if you can kind of do your passion and still maintain friendships. I'm going to be completely frank with if you're 25 years old and you're an entrepreneur, you should not have a boyfriend or girlfriend. You should not have friends. You have to give every minute you can. Part of the reason why I can give a little bit less is because I did that before and I learned a lot of things. But the reality is, you will not have work-life balance if you want to be an entrepreneur. And this idea that you can do it is impossible. However, you can kind of hack it so that you have a good home life and that you're present for the people that need you. Obviously, if something happens with my kids or they need me, I'll drop what I'm doing and go be with them. But and I think, I don't know, just being able to continue doing what I'm doing is success, because, I don't really measure it in money, because after you kind of make, a lot of money and, lose it and make it, you kind of realize, like, first of all, you don't know how much money anyone has, because there's a lot of, the Instagram syndrome. So you just really don't know. And a lot of, like, if you're chasing, you think this person's a big shot or that, really got to make the judgment on when you speak to the person. Otherwise, you really don't know, the substance of the human being. And so to me, it's like, I want to be able to fly first class and be able to do some stuff that are, that you can do if you're very successful. But I'm not, I have an Apple Watch, I don't own a car. personally. My wife does. It's a nice car, but I take the subway. I try to, I did that in the beginning when I made a lot of money. I had a $50,000 watch. I had a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And I realized, like, to me, the only thing about success that is, because having the material stuff's not really, doesn't change your life, is having some ability to have access to things you want to, people and things. And then if you miss a flight and you don't get your ticket refunded, you're not like apoplectic like you are when I was a startup entrepreneur and I couldn't lose $500. It was like a nightmare, right? So that's nice, but for all that convenience that we get as entrepreneurs and being our own boss, there's so much stress because every day there's a problem. Every day you got to find a solution to something. Every day the company could go out of business. I mean, who knows what, so I think that you just got to really feel passionate that you're building something that, I like to build stuff, and, being able to do it is super rewarding. So I would say success is being able to build stuff, being able to still have a good, decent family life, and be able to kind of do the things you want to do and have the access you want. But certainly isn't buying a huge mansion or a car, not in my opinion.
I think that was really well said, and I appreciate you going deeper than I should. Well, I guess based on this interview, I shouldn't have expected anything less. I mean, you've done a great job. I mean, that is once again why I love talking to my Boston natives, because we just tell it how it is, and you don't get that all the time, right? When you're talking with different people, but you shared it, and I think you said something that's so important there. I married my high school sweetheart, and we started having kids right away, and so I had a different whole approach of there was never balance, but I'd never wanted to break that. Right. And but I also recognize people, I mean, this is true. People who weren't married or people who didn't have kids, they had an advantage on time, just period. And so when you're trying to, once again, make these decisions of what matters, what doesn't matter, once again, this is everybody's own thing, right? It's not for me to judge what other people do at all, just to clarify. But you said something well there. If you want to start something, especially high risk, and there's a lot of money involved, having the ability to go all in is amazing. But you said something really important. Once you have it all, so to speak, there's more to it in life, because now you're talking about having relationships and having family and being able to be present, right? And so there's, for me, I've been fortunate, right, to be able to have both pieces of that, so to speak, and that's what I'm so grateful for, is having, what I didn't tell you, Greg, is when I went out to Boston with my two boys, they put the trip together. They wanted me to come see them. I mean, that was awesome. To me, that was worth more than even our experience of going to Fenway and seeing a Bruins game. It was being that they wanted me to be there. And that's, to me, is how I'm, partially how I measure success behind it, regardless of how much dollar bills we have in our bank account. Because you're right, what we really want is flexibility and not stressing over the little things. Like you said, I thought that example of I can't pay my airplane ticket, or for example, people are doing an appropriate level, they're not stressing about gas prices, right? Whether they have an electric car or not, it's not even an issue, right? Because they've gone past that. So you don't have to stress about what I call the small stuff. But when you are in that situation, I didn't grow up that way. I grew up really poor. That meant a lot, right? You had to overcome that. And so I spent, the first part of my decade making sure, well, early on, once you get past that, there's that level of comfort. You don't have to worry about anymore the small stuff. And anyways, sorry to just add on what you're saying. It's just.
No, I was just going to say, totally agree with you. And I think the other thing is, you listen to these podcasts and you listen to folks and you're like, wow, they got it all figured out. Believe me, I don't do any of that stuff perfectly. There's plenty of issues, plenty of time when there's tension over how much I'm working or whatever. But I would say in totality, it works, and we have a good, but I think one of the things as an entrepreneur, when you're watching other folks like Carl and myself that are have had success, I wouldn't say I'm always successful, but have had success. You think they got it all fit. We had to go through all the same that everyone else had to go through. And I've had tons of failures, humiliating failures. I mean, when that thing happened with my company, it was on the front of the globe, basically, right? I was out. See, founder. So, you also have to have big tolerance for pain and, being willing to look, you're taking risks. You could be humiliated. You could have issues, but you got to get back up and get back in the game.
Yeah, well said. And accentuate that it's not always perfect, right? Even though I said, yeah, it sounds great and all these wonderful things, that it's not always perfect. Matter of fact, when I started up this company, my wife was like, no way, not again. I mean, she was like, not another entrepreneurship company. I don't want you to do it. And fortunately, I was able to prove it early on that was working, and so it helped. But man, there was a lot of stress there, and interestingly enough, I'm about to ready to start another company all over again. On top of what I'm doing, but why? It's when you get success and you figure out the ways how to do it, and it's not about balance, but it's about putting your energy into the right areas at the right time.
You got to ask yourself every day, am I doing that?
That's right. Yep. It's awesome. Greg, this is just just to ask you one or two more questions. What is I don't know, maybe it's a book, some type of thing that you've read in the past that has really inspired you? Maybe it's recent, maybe it's a long time ago, but what's one of those things that you either recommend to other people or inspires you today?
I read Ulysses S. Grant by Chernow. It's a big one. It's 800 pages or something like that. But I mean, the guy's super underappreciated in history. I mean, this is a guy that was an alcoholic who's kicked out of the army for drunkenness. Went in his little town in Ohio or Illinois, I can't remember, and hadn't been in the military. The Civil War happened. The guy comes in and starts drilling the local, group of soldiers without even guns. They're using like broom handles, right? He's nobody. Somehow gets like into the postmaster. Long story short, he winds up to being the head of the entire Union force and wins the Civil War. He goes from like total destitution, like no money, to winning the Civil War for the Union and then becoming president for 2 terms, right? And to me, that was just such an incredible story of perseverance, all the stuff that he had been through. He had to live away from his family because they were so broke. He was selling firewood on the street. 4 years before he was the commander of all Union forces, he was selling firewood on the street like a beggar, basically. He got himself together. So I love stories like that. And like anytime we think as an entrepreneur we're struggling, you can always look to history, and you can look to other entrepreneurs. You can find stories that are 10 times worse than what you're dealing with, and the people still got through it.
That I appreciate you bringing that up. And it is, he talked about one of the least mentioned historical figures, right, who had such a significant impact in this country's history, for sure. Okay, Greg, how can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so if you want to check out XSET, we're on all the social platforms, YouTube, everything at XSET. So at XSET, XSET. You could go to xset.com. And if you want to connect with me, you can reach me on all social platforms. My last name, Selkoe, Selkoe. And, if you want to email me, you can email me at gregs@xset.com. And I do try to get back to everyone so if I don't get back to you, that doesn't mean I haven't ignored you. It just means that it slipped through the cracks, because I do have a lot of people that reach out, and I kind of pride myself on always getting back. Sometimes it's like 2 months later. But yeah, so, again, another thing about entrepreneurship, you've got to be persistent, right? There's so many people that I wanted to connect with, and I had to really, keep going at them until they gave me 5 minutes of their time. Now, I'm not going to do that to other young entrepreneurs, but it is, we're busy, but my intentions are always to try and be available.
Thank you, Greg, and thanks for making the opportunity. I appreciate even you sharing the other part. Like it's nuts, like the amount of input we get, and it's like you get somebody. Can I meet with you next week? It's like, are you kidding me? At times, what I mean? It's like, I just want I don't know how many a day I get of LinkedIn. Can we just meet, later today? It's like, anyways, and so but for the meetings that matter and for the people that we can make a difference. I do care, and I do want to respond. And I do want to help make a difference. Especially I had a young man the other day from the UK, just out of business school, and he just wanted to talk and read about the book. And how cool, it's fun when we can give back and help make a difference with the fun stuff. Greg, this episode exceeded my expectations. I appreciate you giving the hard reality and the ups and downs that you've had in your career as an entrepreneur.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Carl.
Absolutely. And everyone else who's listening, I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you've subscribed already on YouTube or any other podcast platform that you're listening to. And as we always like to say, wishing you the very best at measuring your success. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Measure Success podcast. We'll see you again next time to learn from the best. Remember to subscribe now to get future episodes.